Hi Year 11s, back again today to talk to you about AQA GCSE paper 1 question 3. And what we'll do first today is have a little read through question 3. And then we will read the whole source. But when we're reading through the whole source, I'm going to talk to you about how to actively read it and get it annotated to help you answer question 3 most effectively, and the kind of things that I'm looking for as I read through the source. And then what I'm going to do for you, really similar to the video that I did yesterday about paper 2, is just show you 3 model answers. So the first one will be a level 1 answer, which is simple, and just show you and remind you what simple looks like, but specifically for question 3. Secondly, I'm going to do you a sum attempt, a level 2 question, which would be on that GCSE boundary between a grade 3 and a grade 4. And then probably the most important one for all of you is having a look at how to write a clear answer. And again, like the video that I did last time on question 2, it's looking at that difference between what makes it a really good clear answer and how can you make it detailed and perceptive, just to move it up into the next level on the mark scheme, and therefore to help you get your 8s and 9s if you're aiming for those high levels in your GCSEs. Okay, so let's have a look at the question then. So question 3, you now need to think about the whole of the source, and this is for everybody. If you only write about the first paragraph or the first page of the source, it's really difficult to get beyond a level 2, because if you think about those words in level 2, one of the words is some, and if you're only writing about half of the source, or maybe even less than that, then you can't be doing more than some attempt at writing about it. It says clearly in the question you need to write about the whole of the source. So it tells you a little bit in the structure. This text is from the middle of a short story. Okay, so if it's from the middle of the short story, what that should alert you to, and thinking about some of the literature work that you've done, like A Christmas Carol, or maybe Inspector Calls, or Macbeth, or another Shakespeare play, in the middle of a story, that's where the events happen, that's where the climax happens, and you get all the kind of dramatic build up and what's going to happen, like the dramatic stuff happens in the middle of a story. So that's what is probably going to be happening there, and as you read through that, that should just trigger that off in your mind. And then the next part of the question reminds us what we're actually looking at, and that is structure. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? Now, the end of this question is a bit misleading to interest you. Now, I happen to be a big fan of the writer of this story today. So I love Ray Bradbury. I love all his science fiction short stories. So this text does interest me. However, some of the other texts that they've given us on paper 1 don't really interest me at all. But just make sure you don't write, the writer hasn't structured the text to interest me. It doesn't interest me. Maybe I'm into other things, such as horror. And I have marked, believe it or not, so many answers where people answer like that and then seem to get amazed that they get 0 marks, or maybe I can scratch 1 mark from somewhere. So don't be misled with this part of the question. You need to imagine that it's just, how would it interest a geeky reader like me who likes science fiction stories? How would it interest a reader who just loves reading anything? Okay, so don't let that confuse you. Now, on this question, all 3 of the bullet points are really, really helpful. We don't need to cross any of these bullet points out. So it says you could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source. Yes, really important. Remember that the exam boards specifically choose a certain bit, like where they're going to begin it, and they'll do that on purpose so that you've got something powerful to write about straight away. Next bullet point, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops. So that gives you a really good steer as to these questions here, or these slightly simpler questions here. What changes is the first thing that you write down. There's your evidence. Why does it change? That's your explanation or your analysis. Okay, and those are the words that you need to access the mark scheme. So you need to be able to give evidence, and that's the how does the focus change? And the analysis is why does the focus change? And then the third bullet point is any other structural features that interest you. So in a way, what this question is saying to you in the second bullet point is, let's just go through the whole extract and see what changes when. And I've heard some students call this kind of looking at the micro detail, if you like. And then the third bullet point is looking at the macro detail, so the big detail, almost standing back from the extract and saying, is it beginning, middle, and end, or is it like this half and then that half? Because sometimes it is. This one is very much beginning, middle, and end, but there have been other papers where it's kind of like this half happens and then this half is kind of different. In this half, the characters on their own, but in this half, the characters are with their family. So watch out for that. Any other structural features, what's going on in the big structure. Okay, and it doesn't tell you if you have to be biased towards one of those two approaches. Quite often a perceptive student might just look at the really, really big overall structure. When I'm teaching it, I always focus on this middle bullet point. Let's go through it because that's a really simple formula to follow. So before we get into the extract then, let's have a look. There's two approaches that you could take. If it is now the night before your exam, the night before your assessment, and you haven't got time to learn all of that, then let's keep it simple. Tip-top paragraphs. This is going to work for your question 5s in both paper 1 and paper 2 as well. So learning this off by heart, if you don't know it already, is going to help you anyway. So as you're reading through the extract, think to yourself, does the time change? Does the place change? Does the topic change? Or does the person change? And for each of these things, think to yourself, when do they change and why do they change? Back to this middle bullet point here. Now, hopefully you haven't left this until the night before your exam and you've got plenty of time to prepare for your question 3. And these structure questions, which I put together a long time ago, are really, really handy. And in each blue box are some structure terminology, some structure vocab, which would help you put together a nice sophisticated answer. Okay, so it kind of takes this tip-top idea but just develops it in more detail. So whose point of view is a story being told from? Again, what time is it? And you've got the words to help you. Is it chronological or linear, or does it jump backwards and forwards? Is there a little flashback in there? Where am I? So does the place change? Right, in this extract, they're just in the jungle all the time, but do they move around? Does the T-Rex move around? How is the place established? And next one, who is his? This is slightly different from whose views. It's actually who's actually here. So who are the other characters and what are their relationships? Do they speak to each other? And how does dialogue establish their relationships? And then finally, the patterns, symbols, motifs, the big structure, kind of the third bullet point here. That's this last one. And actually, sometimes it's this last one, anything else that interests you kind of thing. That can be where we make our perceptive points. So this is really well worth bearing in mind. Okay, so here is source. It's going to be kind of tiny, especially if you're following along on your phone. So as I always say, it might be worth printing out the source, and the link for that is in the description underneath. So this is how it goes. Don't forget to read the blurb, although that's not part of the structure. Using a time machine, an organisation called Time Safari transports clients into the past to take part in hunting expeditions. A group that includes Mr. Eccles, together with their guide Travis, is visiting a prehistoric jungle in order to shoot a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So that's given us the context we need because it is the middle of a short story. So this is what's happened so far. And they've just arrived there and they're just coming out of the time machine. How does it go? The jungle was high and the jungle was broad. Sounds like music and flying tents filled the sky. And those were pterodactyls soaring with huge grey wings. So straight away, the writer establishes the setting or the place. Now, I always think that question 3 is brilliant for any students who are doing GCSE film, or even if you're doing a reset GCSE and you're doing A-level film, use your film terminology and think about it like a film. When you watch a film, what's the first thing the filmmaker does? They do a big, wide, establishing shot. Why do they do a big, wide, establishing shot? Because it helps to situate you, the viewer, within the landscape of the film, and it kind of shows you where everything is in relation to each other. That's the generic reason, but even being able to explain that kind of general reasoning for why filmmakers or writers do that is going to get you to some attempts. So it's a great place to start. But what changes straight away? 2 things. First of all, the person changes. So it changes from setting to a person, and the person it changes to is Eccles. And we find out about Eccles, it reveals his personality through the dialogue that he's using. I'm shaking like a kid. He's thinking back to the past. So he's kind of having a minor flashback. I've hunted tiger, wild boar, buffalo, elephant, but now this is it. So he's flashing back in time and thinking about all those other occasions where he's been hunting and how this is like the pinnacle of his hunting pastimes. Said Travis. Everyone stopped. Travis raised his hand. Ahead, he whispered, in the mist. There he is. There's his Royal Majesty now. Okay, so what we've got going on here, and we'll come back to this bit towards the end of the extract, is it is linear structure or chronological structure here. Although Eccles has this tiny little flashback, that's kind of his thoughts, the actual main action is going along in chronological order in real time. Okay, and then actually I haven't annotated it here, but it goes back to the jungle again here, doesn't it? So it goes back to the jungle, and the reason why I haven't annotated that is I don't think I've got anything special to say about it, the way it's kind of cut in between the characters and the setting. So just here, what changes? The person. Well, it's not really a person, is it? Because it's the T-Rex coming, so it's like a creature, but that would count under person. So the person changes, and it goes from the setting of the jungle and from these humans talking to the T-Rex. And you can tell it's kind of gone from the people because it goes silent. Actually, I didn't write about that in any of my answers, and that's quite dramatic, isn't it? What changes? It goes from noisy to silence. So that's something that you could definitely talk about. And then it goes from noisy to silence to a sound of thunder, the dinosaur roaring and running. Okay, out of the mist, 100 yards away, came Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it changes back to person again. We've got that dialogue, and it's Eccles talking, and they tell him to be quiet. So dialogue and the way that people talk is a really good structural technique. Be careful though, don't zoom in on the language of the dialogue. You're looking at the dialogue in a big structural way. Now, we know this paragraph really, really well from our question 2. So for goodness sake, don't start writing an answer to your question 2 again. All you need to do is say the next thing that changes is the writer focuses on the T-Rex, and we get a really detailed paragraph of description. But you need to think about why the writer does that in a structural way rather than a language way this time. So why does the writer focus in so much detail on the T-Rex? Well, what he's trying to do is establish the size of the beast, the size of the beast. So it's huge. And by establishing the size of the beast, it creates a sense of imminent danger. So that's what's going on. And that's how it's different from zooming in on the language, because you're getting the overall effect of all these words and phrases down here. However, what I do notice right in the middle here is men like toys. So you've got a really classic structural technique there, and that's the contrast. So I'm saying everything in here is describing how big and how powerful the T-Rex is. We know that from our question 2. But right in the middle of that, we've got the contrast, or the juxtaposition between the creature and the men. That's what's going on here. I'll come back to this yellow motif a bit later. So it switches back to Eccles again. So it shifts back to Eccles. And this time Eccles is again using dialogue. And again, I haven't written this in my answer, in any of the answers actually, but the fact that it's always Eccles who starts talking seems to show us something about his personality. So again, that could be your third bullet point, something that you could put in your third bullet point, the fact that Eccles just doesn't know when to shut up, basically, and that tells us, and also the way the other characters react to him, which I do write about. Okay, it's dialogue all the way through here, but then it switches back. It sees us to the creature, and they know it's the right creature because it's got red paint like a target on its chest there. And then we go down here and we got back to Eccles again. He's talking again. So we've got the dialogue again down here, and it's Eccles who's set that off, but also we've got time, which is changing here. It was never like this before. So what he's doing here, he's flashing back again and thinking about hunting the tigers and the wild boar and the buffalo. So you can see that those 2 points kind of link together. That's an interesting structural point. And then down at the bottom, we've got the Tyrannosaurus falling. And you can see, I marked it here. There's His Royal Majesty now. And like how amazing he is all here. But here he falls. And what you can see there is, although we've got a linear structure, so it's going in the correct time order, we have got a link, like almost like a circular link and a contrast between the beginning when they introduce and the end where we say goodbye to the creature. Now, I did find some third bullet point stuff, anything else that interests you as well. So if you have a look at the yellow, like a kid, men like toys, grab the moon. It seemed like a toy gun. The way that Travis talks to him, shut up, said Travis. Go and hide in the machine. And Eccles' helplessness. And what this is a motif that's being developed. And the motif is a motif of childhood. Childhood games and childhood toys. He feels like a kid. The men are like toys. The guns are like toys. Grab the moon sounds like a children's story. Shut up, his Travis sounds like the way that someone disrespectful would talk to a kid. Hide in the machine sounds like hide and seek. And helplessness, that's what children are like. So you get this motif of childhood being developed. It's this idea that Eccles, and maybe the other men as well, like totally out of their depth. They are like children playing in this historical jungle. And then something else that I noticed, I wouldn't really call this a motif, but it's kind of, it does recur. And it's this focus on the eyes. So the eyes rolled, and then down the bottom, it's boulder stone eyes leveled with the men, so the eyes again, and they fired at the metallic eyelids. And this bit here is eyes rolled, these kind of soulless eyes, a quotation I gave you to look at last time for the language analysis. These soulless eyes are like the one weak spot on the dinosaur, and structurally here, this almost foreshadows what's going to happen at the end, that they're going to target the dinosaur's one weak spot, its soulless eyes. So I've talked you through how I see structure there. Now, obviously, if you're annotating this up, you've got like 30 seconds to do what has just taken me in excess of 5 minutes to explain. So you'd need to kind of do this at absolute rapid speed, so you've still got time to talk about it. So let's have a look at and a think about that mark scheme again. And we're going to start off with a simple response. And this would get you a GCSE level 1 or 2. So it'll get you your level 1 qualification, but not what we call a pass mark. It's not going to get you into college or sixth form, and it's probably not going to get you a fancy job. However, it's a good place to start if you're struggling with this question, if you're still finding it difficult to wrap your head around structure. It's better to have a go and pick up 2 really, really quick and easy marks than just to skip it and get a big fat 0. Okay, so if you're worried about question 3, go for a beginning, middle and end approach. And this is what I did, and it took me 1 minute to write this answer. I timed myself, it just took me 1 minute. And you can see I've covered the whole text in the beginning, then in the middle, in the end. Okay, so I've covered like the whole text, even though it is very simple. So at the beginning, the writer sets the scene in the big jungle. Okay, then the T-Rex comes in, which is interesting because it's scary. You can see it's really simple, but it's still talking about structure, isn't it? In the middle, Mr. Eccles gets scared and runs away. In the end, the dinosaur gets shot and dies, which is interesting because it is dramatic. So what have I done? Because I would get 2 out of 8 for this. So it's 2 really, really easy marks, taking me 2 minutes to get. It's a simple summary of what happened. So it's like this happened in the beginning, this happens next, this happens in the middle, and this happens in the end. And I've just summed that up really, really simple. And then I have given 2 very simple explanations of why this is effective. This is interesting because it's scary. This is interesting because it's dramatic. So I've done that twice, and that's how come I can get 2 out of 8 rather than just 1 out of 8, because I've had 2 really simple goes at saying what the effect of the structure is. One because it's scary and one because it's dramatic, and they're both correct. They're just not really bringing much to the party. I've got some really simple structure terminology there, which just really helps me make sure that I get the 2 beginning, then in the middle, in the end. You kind of don't even think this is structure, but it shows I know that, like in my own simple way, that it's a linear structure, beginning, middle, end. Okay, so it does everything that you need to do to get a mark. It is very simple, very simplistic. But hey, do you know what? It shows that I can understand the whole story. It shows that I know it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and things change. So it's showing a really simple awareness of a structure, and even having a couple of goes at explaining why the structure is effective for the reader. Okay, here's a sum answer. So there we go. Let's have a look at a sum answer. And what I did to write this answer was I just copied and pasted my simple answer. So I've really, really gone with those original 4 points that I made, but I've added a couple of extra marks on. And when I'm thinking about the effects, I've tried to go into a bit more detail. So let's have a look. So at the beginning, let's move that. At the beginning, the writer sets the scene in the big jungle. So that's almost identical to the simple answer. I've added a bit more on, which helps the reader know where everything is in relation to the hunters. So I've made an attempt to explain why the writer's done that. It shows that I can understand, I've got some understanding of how structure works. Next, Eccles has a bit of a flashback to where he has been hunting before to reveal more about his personality. So I'm going to move that over to where it says reveal. So I haven't said what it reveals about his personality. So it is again another attempt to explain the effects. So to get it up into a clear explanation, I need to say what it shows about the personality without starting to zoom in on the language by accident. Then, so we could have reveal or we could have then for our structure words. Then the T-Rex comes in, which is interesting because it shows the reader that this is what they've come to hunt. Okay, so can you see why that is a little bit better than the simple one? Okay, so up until this point, we didn't know what they were searching for, what they were hunting for. And so that's what's going on here. So the writer zooms in and gives lots of description of the dinosaur to show that it is dangerous. Okay, so again, it's an attempt to explain why the reader focuses now on describing the dinosaur in so much detail. It's not a clear explanation, it's not a clever explanation, it is some attempt. A decent attempt, but only some. Right, the writer next uses speech. I'm going to highlight that. Speech between Mr. Travis and Eccles, which shows Eccles is scared. Okay, so I picked up that they're using speech. I put speech, dialogue would have been better, but speech is fine. And it does show that Eccles is scared. So again, it's not a very detailed attempt, but it's better than simple. I've seen a bit more in there. Travis tells him to go and hide. So there's another example of structure, because that's what happens next. In the end, the dinosaur gets shot and dies, which is interesting because it's different. So contrast I'm talking about here. Should I put that next? Put that in the end. Put that as different from the beginning. This is interesting because it's different from the beginning when the dinosaur is strong. Okay, so I've spotted that contrast. I haven't remembered to use the word contrast, but I put it's different from the beginning. So that is structural terminology there. Now, let's see what we've got. Just move that to beginning and we'll move that to next. So we've got a terminology beginning, next, flashback, zooms in on, next, speech, in the end, different from the beginning. Okay, so again, I'm not using really fancy structure terminology, but there's some key terminology words in there that shows that it's different from me writing about language. Right, so what does this answer that would get 4 out of 8, what does it do? It sums up what happened. Okay, so I've always almost kind of bullet pointed in sentences what happens and what changes. Okay, that's the first thing that you need to do. I've also made, for each of those examples of what changes, I've made an attempt to explain what the effect of that is. So I've made 6 attempts. So I've got a range of examples in there. So that's really good. And I've tried to explain the effects. I've attempted to use some structure terminology, although it is it's better than the limited stuff on the last answer, but it's still quite basic. And all in all, it took me about 3 minutes after I copied and pasted the simple answer. It took me about 3 minutes to add on this detail. So that means in total, I've spent about 4 minutes on this answer. And it's a fairly decent length. So what would it get? It would get a 4 out of 8. It does everything needed for a level 2 mark. Do you remember when I did my question 2 answer, I said this is a really good 4 out of 8, and it's nearly 5 out of 8. This one is what I call a solid 4 out of 8. It's not really bothering clear. Much of it is too vague. Everything is relation to the hunters. It tells us about his personality, but it doesn't tell us what. It shows them what they can't hunt, again, a bit vague. It shows that it's dangerous, very vague. It shows that Eccles is scared, it's a bit vague. And it is interesting here, again, really vague. So it's got like 6 attempts, but they're all quite vague attempts. This is probably the best one. A flashback to when he's been hunting before. It reveals more about his personality as probably and where it is in relation to the hunters. Those are probably the best attempts. Okay, so on the next one, I've got a long answer. I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to think about, is it clear or is it perceptive? And where is it clear? And if you do think it's perceptive, where do you think it's perceptive? So as I read through, have a think about those things. So the writer immediately establishes the setting, which is the jungle, and the animals within it as pterodactyls, so the reader can situate themselves in a prehistoric setting. The writer next uses dialogue to reveal Eccles' experience as a hunter, as he has a flashback to hunting in the present day. The action then shifts as Travis points out the T-Rex that is approaching. However, in his dialogue, Travis holds back the name and calls the beast his royal majesty to create mystery and suspense both for the other characters and for the reader. The writer then establishes the physical size and power of the T-Rex in a detailed, descriptive paragraph in which he also juxtaposes the huge size of the creature with the men-like toys. This creates a sense of threat and horror to hold the reader's interest. As the creature advances, the writer switches to dialogue, again in a conversation between Travis and Eccles, where Eccles reveals his fear and a cowardly side to his nature. The two men are contrasted through dialogue, as Eccles is panicking and Travis is trying to remain patient whilst getting him to safety. Eccles' behaviour through this section could foreshadow trouble ahead, as he is behaving irrationally in helplessness. He could jeopardise the other hunter's safety. The extract ends with the men killing the dinosaur and it falling, which contrasts with the way the writer described its entrance as all-powerful and godlike. Throughout the extract, the writer develops the motif of childhood toys and games with a reference to how the men are like toys to the dinosaur, how Eccles feels as excited as a kid. Even showing Eccles hiding in the time machine like in a game of hide and seek. The motif implies the men are playing with things they shouldn't and might be out of their depth. So, is it clear or is it perceptive? Okay, so let's have a little look and I'll go through it with you. So what I've put in yellow is all the places that I've used terminology. So if you don't know how to use the structured terminology, this is a really, really good example. And I worked hard to try and get this terminology in here. So we've got establishes, situate, dialogue, flashback, shifts, dialogue again, establishes again, juxtaposes, switches, reveals. Switches could be shifts as well, contrasted, dialogue. So I'm kind of repeating some of the word. Foreshadow, ends, contrast throughout, motif, and so on. So I've used that terminology throughout, but that wasn't my question. My question was actually, is it clear or is it perceptive and detailed? Well, it starts off, this first paragraph, really, really clear. Establishes the setting, and it talks about the pterodactyls, and it says it's prehistoric. Okay, we talk about Eccles' flashback, and we talk about the shift, and we've got the dialogue here, and the withholding of information. So there's a lot going on here, and it's all really clearly explained and developed what the effect is. In this one, again, they establish the physical size and the power of the T-Rex. So again, that's a clear point. And where it talks about juxtaposing the creature compared to the men-like toys, that is a really clear point. It's kind of well spotted there. Then adding on to that, it creates a sense of threat and horror. And that's clear as well, because it is quite specific, unlike the previous answer. We've got the switch back to dialogue, and I just give clear information about what it reveals about Eccles' personality. And here it reveals his fear and his cowardly side. And it talks about the two men being contrasted through the dialogue. So again, we've got the opposition between the two men. And I really, really clearly explain what is the contrast. One of them is getting really frustrated with Eccles and he's losing his patience. He's trying to hold on to it. And Eccles is just being a big baby, basically. Okay, then we've got this paragraph here, which I'd say kind of almost goes back to it almost goes back to a level 2 answer here. It was a bit kind of wasted words in the end. I suppose like the contrast with its entrance as all powerful and godlike, that could shift it up to clear, but not really. But then at the end, I think that I really nail a nice perceptive point here. So by spotting this motif, childhood toys, and I think I've got some nice analysis down here. So I think I've got the one perceptive point. The other thing that I think, if I have a look at my comment on the next page, I'll explain it, is I have got detail in this answer. It's a really detailed answer. And I do keep like referring back and linking the ideas together. So that gives a real sense of detail. So let's see what I put just over here. I think that this would get at least a 7 out of 8, and it might get an 8 out of 8. Like, I mark these papers, I'm going to be honest with you, examiners very, very rarely give full marks. Okay, it has to be amazing to get full marks. I'll put myself, oh, actually, I'll minimize myself instead. Put a bit of room in there. There we go, mini me. So we'd get either 7 or 8 out of 8. It is detailed and it is perceptive. It starts nice and clear, but all the way through the detail builds up, and this yellow point is perceptive at the end. Throughout, which is also level 4, I use structural terminology in a sophisticated way. But more than that, I use structural terminology to help me be concise, so I don't have to explain what I'm trying to say. There is a wide range of points here, wide range of points, but, and this, I was really naughty on this one, this took me 10 minutes. Remember, it's an 8-mark question. I should be spending only 8 minutes on it. However, I'm going to suggest that I probably saved myself 2 minutes on question 1. So an overrun of 2 minutes, it's not the end of the world, but don't get into the habit of that. Otherwise, you're cutting into your creative writing time. The answer is totally focused on the effects and the meanings and the moods that the writer is trying to create. So I really, really understand that there is a writer at work in this whole process. And what I have never done there is accidentally analysed language, because if you slip into analysing language, you're going to lose loads of time, and you don't have the opportunity to lose time on this one. Okay, so I have got a task for you, and it's a learning and memorizing task today rather than a writing task. So if you're aiming for grade 5 and above, which is probably most of you out there, I want you to maybe do a screen grab of this and try and learn these structure questions and as much of this terminology as you can. The other thing that you can do to help you learn the terminology is pop back and see how that terminology is all being used in context just there. If you've left your revision until right at the last minute, naughty, naughty, but I understand it happens. Or if right now you've got plenty of time for your revision, but you're aiming for a grade 3 or a grade 4 and you're realistic, just revise those tip-top paragraphs. Change paragraph if time, place, topic, or person changes, because that's going to help you, like I said, in question 5 on paper 1 and paper 2, remembering how to use paragraphs, okay? And then I've just picked out 6 really, really useful words for you to try and memorize. So establishes, shifts, positions, as in positions the reader, or positions the characters, reveals, contrasts, and linear. Linear means in a straight line fashion. So try to memorize all of this if you're aiming for a really, really good grade, including this really useful structure terminology. Or if you've left it to the last minute, or you just want to keep things simple, revise your tip-top paragraphs and these 6 words. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. I really, really hope it was useful for you. And I'll see you next time, where we'll spend a bit of time thinking about those good old C's paragraphs to evaluate. Bye for now.